The invitation came in the form of a sleek, embossed envelope with the Piers Morgan Uncensored logo emblazoned in black. Karoline Levitt's team opened it with wary eyes. Piers Morgan rarely invited guests he didn't plan to challenge. And with the midterm storm building and the political climate on edge, this invitation felt less like a gesture and more like a gauntlet thrown. Karoline, sitting in her office at the White House, read the invite silently. Her expression didn't flicker. "He thinks I'll fold," she said finally, her voice even. "He wants a show." Her communications director raised an eyebrow. "You think it's a trap?" Karoline smiled faintly. "I think it's an opportunity." Piers had taken subtle jabs at her in previous segments, calling her Trump's obedient megaphone, a talking point machine, and one of the least battle-tested press secretaries in recent history. Now he wanted her on his turf, under studio lights, facing his trademark mix of sarcasm, smugness, and relentless interruption. Her team hesitated. "You know how he plays. He'll bait you, cut you off, twist your words." Karoline's response was calm. "Then I won't let him," she tapped her desk. "I'll come with more than talking points. I'll come with receipts." The show was scheduled for Thursday night, prime time. Social media buzzed with the announcement. Karoline Levitt versus Piers Morgan. Live. Headlines followed. Can she hold her own? Piers versus press secretary. Sparks expected. The View mocked the matchup. MSNBC rolled their eyes. But conservative circles rallied. Karoline's going into the lion's den. The day of the taping, Karoline dressed in a tailored navy suit, sharp shoulders, minimal jewelry, except one thing, a small silver cross necklace resting at her collarbone. Her mother's, a reminder of resolve. As the motorcade pulled up outside the London-based studio, the city lights cast a glow over the rainy pavement. Karoline stepped out, heels hitting concrete with steady rhythm. Inside, Piers was already mic'd up, going over his notes, leaning back in his chair, grinning like he knew something she didn't. "She's not ready," he said to his producer. "She'll fold the second I press her." He had no idea. The studio lights flared white and blinding, casting long shadows across the glass desk between them. The opening sequence rolled with rapid cuts of world headlines, flashing images of protests, political scandals, and Karoline Levitt herself, stepping off Air Force One, sparring with reporters, walking confidently through the White House press room. The music swelled and cut. "Tonight," Piers Morgan announced dramatically, his voice dripping with performance, "we welcome someone who's become a central figure in America's political theater. Karoline Levitt, press secretary, Trump loyalist, and, some might say, the most combative communicator in Washington today." Karoline didn't flinch. Her posture was straight, eyes focused, hands resting calmly on the glass desk. She wore no earpiece. She wanted no coaching, no delay. Piers leaned forward slightly, a glint in his eye. "Karoline, let's not waste time. You've made headlines defending President Trump's deportation policies, the southern border crackdown, and calling critics of his administration, what was the phrase, soft-handed elitists. I want to ask plainly, do you even understand the damage your words cause, or do you just memorize scripts?" The moment was perfectly orchestrated. A cold question, a smirk, a jab laced with condescension. The crowd behind the cameras tensed. The producers waited for a stumble. Karoline blinked once, then smiled. "Piers, what I understand," she said evenly, "is that truth cuts deeper than performance, and you, of all people, should know that." There was a pause, short but electric. Piers leaned back slightly, amused. "I see," he said. "So you've come prepared with slogans." Karoline nodded slowly. "No slogans, just facts. And if you're ready for those, we can begin." Piers chuckled, then turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, we might be in for a storm tonight." He pivoted back. "One more question before we dive in. When you're this young, this polished, and this fiercely loyal, don't you ever wonder if you're being used?" Karoline didn't hesitate. "I'd wonder more if I were sitting here playing neutral while my country burns." The air in the studio shifted. The opening jab had landed, but not the way Piers expected. The chessboard was already tilting, and Karoline had made her first move. Piers tapped his pen against the glass desk, the click echoing in the studio like a ticking clock. His smile was wide but sharp. "Let's get into it then," he said. "President Trump's immigration policy. Your cornerstone defense. You've stood by it, praised it, and called it protecting Americans. Others call it cruel, even inhumane. Families torn apart, children in cages. Do those words mean anything to you? Or is that just liberal noise to you people?" Karoline didn't flinch. "Let's be clear," she said. "What's cruel is ignoring the criminal networks smuggling people across the border. What's inhumane is pretending open borders are compassionate while Americans die from fentanyl and violent crime. You want to talk about compassion, Piers? Start with the victims." He arched a brow. "So you're saying it's about safety, not politics?" Karoline nodded. "It's about sovereignty. You may not value that here in London. But in America, we protect our borders, because a country without borders isn't a country." The audience murmured, some approving, others skeptical. Piers leaned forward, sharpening his tone. "Let me quote you, Karoline. If you want open borders, you don't belong in Washington." That's a pretty exclusionary statement, isn't it? What about the millions of Americans who disagree with you? "They have the right to be wrong," she replied coolly. "And I have the responsibility to protect the people they pretend to care about." A flicker passed across Piers's face, part surprise, part intrigue. She wasn't rattling. In fact, she was pressing. He shifted topics. "Let's talk about climate change. Another thing you've called a political shield. You don't believe it's real?" Karoline shook her head. "I believe it's real. I also believe politicians use it to expand government, push taxes, and control people's lives. You don't need to burn the economy down to save the planet." Piers was quick. "That's a line, Karoline. It sounds good, but you're dodging the science." "No," she said, her voice firmer. "I'm rejecting the weaponization of it. There's a difference." The tension in the room was rising. The chess game was no longer one-sided. Piers had expected to corner her. Instead, he was meeting a wall of control, precision, and unexpected fire. He adjusted his papers, then smiled slightly. "I'll give you credit, Karoline. You don't fold easily." She leaned in, voice low. "You're right. I don't." The moment Piers realized he wasn't in control anymore came when Karoline reached into her blazer and calmly pulled out a folded sheet of paper. The audience, the producers, even Piers himself seemed to pause as she smoothed it flat on the table. "This," she said clearly, holding it up, "is a DHS report detailing the 1,178 illegal immigrants with felony convictions deported under the Trump administration in just 1 year, including charges of homicide, assault, and trafficking." She slid the page toward him. "You asked earlier if I understand the impact of our policies. I do. This is the impact. And if you're going to call me cruel for standing behind it, then you better be ready to face these numbers." Piers hesitated. He hadn't expected this kind of preparation. Not from her, not live. The screen behind them changed, at Karoline's cue, to highlight key figures. No spin, just raw stats. The audience gasped as headlines flashed. "Repeat offenders deported. Operation Sentinel success. Cartel interdictions doubled." Karoline continued, her voice steely. "You want to mock me for being young. You want to reduce me to a mouthpiece. But I come armed with the one thing no smear can erase: facts." The air grew electric. Piers tried to regain footing. "Karoline, facts without context are just tools. Numbers don't show the families broken, the children separated." "Neither do your sound bites," she interrupted. "You want to talk context? Then let's talk about the families who were victims of those you would have let stay. You say I'm cold for defending border security. I say you're reckless for ignoring its consequences." The studio was silent now. No one shifted. Even the camera crew froze. Then, slowly, applause broke out from the audience. Piers sat back, blinking. This wasn't the interview he'd planned. She wasn't cracking. She wasn't folding. She had just flipped the table. And he wasn't sure how to take it. Piers Morgan wasn't a stranger to being challenged. But this was different. Karoline Leavitt wasn't reacting the way most guests did. She wasn't defensive. She wasn't spinning. She was leading, and that irked him. He adjusted his jacket and leaned forward again, forcing a smirk. Karoline, let's not pretend you're some lone crusader. You represent a deeply controversial administration. Trump's presidency divided America like no other. Riots, racial tension, chaos in the streets. How do you defend that and still call yourself a voice for unity? Karoline gave a short breath, not quite a laugh, but close. You think unity comes from agreeing with you? She asked. That's not unity. That's submission. The audience shifted, sensing something bracing coming. True unity, she continued, comes from telling the truth even when it's unpopular. I won't lie to Americans to make elites feel comfortable. That's not my job. That was the last administration's specialty. Piers raised an eyebrow, but Karoline wasn't finished. You talk about division. But division didn't start with Trump. It started when working-class Americans were ignored, laughed at, silenced, called deplorables. Trump didn't divide them. He gave them a microphone. The room was hot with energy now. Applause broke out again, louder this time. Piers's jaw tightened. So you're saying, he shot back, that Trump healed America? I'm saying, Karoline replied, that he forced America to confront what it had ignored for too long. She picked up the DHS paper again and held it aloft, unwavering. He didn't cause the fire. He pulled the alarm. Piers sat back, gripping his pen a little harder. It was supposed to be a pressure interview, a takedown, a moment to show her limits. Instead, Karoline was rising with every challenge, unshaken, unflinching, turning every jab into fuel. The rhythm of the interview had shifted, and Piers knew it. The crowd knew it. And worst of all, so did Karoline. Piers Morgan straightened in his chair, a hint of agitation tightening his posture. The smooth showman's charm was cracking. For the first time in the segment, he glanced off camera, as if to signal producers, or maybe just to collect himself. But Karoline didn't give him the space. You look surprised, she said, her tone controlled, but edged. Did you expect me to flinch? To fold like one of your hand-picked guests? Piers shot back quickly. I expected you to come prepared, but I didn't expect you to turn this into a campaign speech, she smiled. That's where you're wrong. I didn't come to campaign. I came to correct the record, and clearly, she gestured at him and the room around them. That's long overdue. The studio was thick with silence. The audience wasn't clapping now, but only because they were riveted. A storm was brewing under the surface, the kind that made people lean in and stop scrolling on their phones. Piers leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Let's talk about January 6th, then. The riot? The insurrection? Your defense of Trump's rhetoric? How can you justify standing behind someone who inspired that chaos? Karoline didn't blink. I'll never justify violence. But I will ask a fair question. Why don't you bring this same energy when cities burned during BLM riots? When federal courthouses were torched, police stations seized? Piers began to interject, but she pushed forward. Here's the truth, Piers. Political violence is wrong, period. But selective outrage is worse. It divides people, devalues justice, and makes a mockery of unity. There it was again, that balance. Not dodging, not appeasing, just reframing the debate on her terms. You think you're above hypocrisy? Piers pressed. You've never wavered? Never misjudged? Karoline leaned forward. Of course I've made mistakes, but defending the truth isn't one of them. The lights above flickered slightly, cameras still rolling. Piers looked at her, not as a flustered guest, not as a punchline, but as something else entirely. A real opponent. The kind that didn't back down. And the kind that just might be winning. Piers Morgan had faced titans, prime ministers, generals, Silicon Valley billionaires. But something about this moment felt different. Not just tense, volatile. Karoline Leavitt wasn't posturing. She wasn't deflecting or pleading or hedging her words like most guests did when the pressure was on. She was gaining ground, and Piers felt it. He leaned forward slightly, shifting his tone from smug to sharp. Let's be honest, Karoline, he said, cutting through the buzz of the studio. All this passion is fine for sound bites, but you haven't answered what matters. You're young, you're idealistic. But people wonder if you're just a mouthpiece. Are you truly capable of thinking for yourself? Or are you just echoing Trump with a prettier face? The jab was cold and calculated. There were murmurs in the audience, a few gasps. Even the producers behind the glass looked up from their monitors. Karoline didn't blink. Slowly, she turned toward Piers, her hands resting on the desk. "Is that what you think?" she asked quietly. "That I'm just decoration with a teleprompter?" He shrugged, pretending casualness. "I think a lot of viewers are asking." That's when she moved. Her hand clenched, her spine straightened, and with a sudden, powerful motion, Karoline slammed her fist on the table. Thud! It echoed across the room like a gavel in a courtroom. The crowd jumped. A few people clapped reflexively. Piers flinched, not out of fear, but because he knew he'd lost control of the interview. "You want to talk about independence?" Karoline's voice rose, not shouting, but fierce and unwavering. "I walked into this building without a script. I sat in that chair knowing you'd try to rattle me. And I'm still sitting here, louder, clearer, and freer than you ever expected." She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "I don't carry water for Trump. I carry truth. And if that truth scares people like you, maybe it's because you're not used to hearing it from someone who doesn't apologize for believing it." The audience erupted. Some stood. One person in the second row yelled, "That's right!" Piers tried to cut in. "Look, no one—" But Karoline wasn't finished. "I represent the millions who were told they were too rural, too religious, too white, too conservative to matter. You call it noise. I call it a voice, and that voice, it's not going away. I am that voice." In that moment, Piers Morgan, a man who prided himself on controlling the room, was reduced to silence. The silence following Karoline's words wasn't empty. It was charged. The air inside the studio felt electric, like the seconds before a thunderstorm. Piers Morgan, ever the showman, instinctively knew the moment had spiraled out of his grasp. But he wasn't ready to concede. Not yet. He adjusted his tie and gave a thin, calculated smile. "Quite a performance," he said, his voice laced with irony. "But is this politics, Karoline, or theater?" Karoline exhaled softly, almost like she'd been expecting the deflection. "It's theater," she said calmly, "but only because people like you have turned real policy into entertainment." She paused, letting her words simmer. "I came here to talk about what matters. The economy, the southern border, the erosion of faith, both in God and in country. But you want to make it about optics, about personality, about whether I can handle the pressure. Well, here I am, still standing, still answering, and I haven't ducked a single question." The audience began clapping again. Piers waved a hand, trying to bring the temperature down. "Okay, but let's back up." "No," Karoline said sharply, standing now. "Let's not back up. Let's move forward." She turned toward the live camera, her voice steady, but emotionally raw. "I want every woman watching this, every conservative who's been mocked, every Christian told to sit down. I want them to see this moment and know they're not alone. You're not crazy for believing in traditional values. You're not wrong for demanding secure borders or lower taxes, and you're not weak for crying out when your voice is dismissed." Piers leaned forward, a note of tension in his throat. "But Karoline, anger isn't a strategy." "This isn't anger," she snapped. "This is clarity. And clarity sounds loud when people have spent years covering their ears." Someone in the front row stood up and clapped, then another. The crowd was shifting, not just in energy but in allegiance. Even some who hadn't come in as fans were nodding now. Piers tried one last time. "But you're not in power. You're a spokesperson, not a policymaker." Karoline smiled. "Not yet." The room exploded with cheers. What happened next was beyond even Karoline's expectations. As the live segment ended and Piers stiffly turned to camera with his scripted closing line, the audience remained standing. Some chanted her name softly. Others just stared, stunned by the shift they had just witnessed. But the real storm didn't start in the studio. It started online. Before the lights cooled on set, Karoline's fiery monologue was clipped and posted on X, gaining 300,000 views in under an hour. The moment her fist hit the table, captioned, "This is when she took control," spread like gasoline in dry brush. Young women shared it with the quote, "She didn't break, she broke them." Conservative influencers hailed her as the new face of unapologetic republicanism. Liberal accounts scrambled to minimize the moment, calling it performance art, but even they couldn't ignore the numbers. The clip dominated trending topics by midnight. Karoline won, Piers folded cable, news panels lit up in real time. Fox News called it a seismic moment in political media. Newsmax aired it 4 times in 1 hour. Even MSNBC couldn't resist showing the confrontation with the disclaimer, "Viewer discretion advised, contains heated exchange." Back in the green room, Karoline sat quietly with her team. Her phone buzzed non-stop, dozens of missed calls and texts. Trump's inner circle, state representatives, youth conservative groups, all asking the same thing. "How did you pull that off?" Karoline simply said, "I didn't blink." A producer from another major network knocked on the door. "We'd like to have you next week, prime time. No restrictions." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she opened her phone and read the last notification, a Truth Social post from Donald J. Trump himself. "Karoline Leavitt just crushed it on Piers Morgan. No one could have done it better. She's not just my voice, she's the future." Her staff froze. This wasn't just viral heat. This was the spark of a national shift. Karoline looked up, calm as ever. "Tell them I'll be there, but next time I'm not coming as a guest." The morning after the interview, America was already split, but energized. Cable news anchors scrambled for a narrative. CNN labeled it confrontational. The New York Times ran a column asking if Karoline had gone too far. But in coffee shops, college dorms, and construction sites across the country, people weren't talking about Piers Morgan. They were talking about her. The clip of Karoline slamming her fist on the table hit 12 million views by noon. TikTok edits paired her stare down with music from Gladiator and Interstellar. Gen Z influencers who had never even liked Trump reposted the moment with captions like, "You don't have to agree with her to admit, she owned that room." Fox News invited her back for an exclusive. CPAC organizers called. Turning Point USA announced she'd headline their next rally. The conservative base didn't just embrace her, they rallied behind her like a rising star. At the White House, a source leaked to Politico that Trump personally called her that morning. "Karoline, you've got fire. We need more of that. You didn't just defend me. You made me look good. Keep going." And Karoline would. But not to defend anyone this time. She had become more than a spokesperson. She was now a symbol. Later that week, she walked into a press event in D.C. No teleprompter, no notes, just the same black suit and that simple silver cross around her neck. Cameras flashed, microphones extended. Someone asked if she'd go back on Piers Morgan's show. Karoline smiled coolly. "Next time, he'll come on mine." The crowd laughed, then applauded. She turned and looked directly into a Fox camera filming live. "This isn't about yelling. It's about not backing down. And if you're someone out there who's been told to sit down, keep quiet, or wait your turn, I'm telling you, your turn just arrived." The room erupted. Karoline Leavitt didn't just win an argument that night. She forged a path for a new kind of leadership, unapologetic, bold, and impossible to ignore. As the feed faded out and the headlines continued to roll, one truth had become crystal clear. She didn't fold, she flipped the table, and the nation watched. What you just witnessed wasn't just a clash between two strong voices on live television. It was the moment the script flipped. In a world where power often silences principle, Karoline Leavitt showed what it means to stand your ground, speak your truth, and shake the room doing it. She didn't cave under pressure. She didn't beg for approval. She didn't fold. She fought. This wasn't just another interview. It was a declaration. So if you've ever been underestimated, sidelined, or told you're not strong enough, remember this moment. Remember that sometimes all it takes is one voice, one table slam, and one undeniable truth to shift the entire conversation. And if you want more moments like this, real, raw, and impossible to ignore, make sure to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications, because we're just getting started.